So, believe it or not, I used to be a kid. Some would argue that I am still a kid. I mean, I'm 19. I can see that. I guess it really depends on your outlook on life or your perspective. That was the word I was originally going to use. Couldn't find it. Anyway, that means I was once a youth, or I still am a youth. Point is, I went to youth groups when I was Christian, right? And there were a lot of weird things that happened at the youth groups. I went to, I want to say 3 or 4 separate youth groups, because there was one. I went to 2 churches when I lived or when I lived with my parents. We went to one called Bethel Baptist, I think, and it was a Baptist church, and they had like Sunday school and whatever, but there wasn't a proper youth group, right? Because there were like, I don't know, 6 or 7 kids around my age, and at the time I was like 7 years old, and then there was like maybe a couple teenagers, so they just didn't have the resources for that. It was a very small church, and of course, again, there were Sunday school, but there wasn't anything like a proper youth group, and the kids would all hang out during the church potlucks and all that, of course, but you know, nothing that substantial really happened at that church. I think that's actually where my parents got married, but nothing substantial to my experience as a Christian happened at that church. So then we moved to, or we didn't move, but my parents realized that they disagreed with some of the things that Bethel Baptist was teaching. So we moved to a different church called Telemach Christian Center, and we went there for a while. It's a pretty small church. I don't remember how many people were there, but this place, you know, at first it was just like normal Sunday school, but I think at some point we had like 12 kids coming in usually, and they realized that they could, you know, put more resources towards a proper youth group, because they already had the youth teachers, of course, and they were certified and all that, of course, legally, or not. I don't know if it was technically legally, but they had like training courses about what you need to have at least 2 people present at all times to reduce the risk of abuse. You need to keep like a respectful distance away from kids, all, you know, like actually good stuff that you need to take into account, and that some people might not even think of, and that some people will abuse, of course. So, you know, and everyone who even remotely worked with kids had to take this, like, always. So, you know, that was a really good precaution, I think. Anyway, so they had, I think it was either Friday night. I think it was Friday night youth groups. No, it was Wednesday night youth groups. There were Wednesday night youth groups. That was right. Because it was a really weird time of the week to do it. Because most kids had school the next day. But it took place at night because it couldn't take place in the morning because kids had school that day, right? So they would have this youth group thing. And it wasn't anything special. The kids would come in and they'd be like, oh, Bible verse, here you go. And then we'd leave. And then eventually, you know, when more kids started showing up, they realized that, hey, maybe we can, you know, make a thing out of this. So they changed the day of the week that it would happen to Saturday. They got a new youth pastor. Well, he wasn't technically a new youth pastor. They had like 3 separate roles, right? They had the pastor, the youth pastor. They had the, like, I don't know what you'd call it. Technically, the youth pastor that I was talking about wasn't a pastor. He was a pastor, but he wasn't the technical youth pastor, as in like the church's position. That was actually the pastor's son. He had the technical title of youth pastor, and then we had an organizer. But the one that wasn't actually the pastor would be the one who would go up on the podium and talk and, you know, teach lessons and all that. And he was also the singer in the worship group, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't really a choir, because there was a guy on the drums, there was a girl on the guitar. I think someone was on the keyboard at one point. There was someone on bass, and then there was the singer. So, you know, basic youth band. And I think there were a couple. I was actually on that at one point, but I'll get to that. Anyway, so and the organizer, she was really nice. She actually ended up giving me money for mowing her lawn so I could go, and I did a horrible job at mowing the lawn, so I'm bringing this up, to go to a different youth camp, which I'll also get to. So anyway, we called this thing Amped. So AM, like amp, like AMP, like amplified, and then T for like the cross. Stupid name, but I loved it. I thought it was so cool. I would invite my friends to go all the time. Eventually we had Like the first 3 or 4 rows, of pews just completely full, and it wasn't a small church by any means, but like, I don't know, you could probably fit 10 people on each of those rows, or on each half of those rows, so it'd be like 20 people per row. So we'd have 60 people in there sometimes, and it was a lot of fun. There would be like games and stuff, of course, to attract the youth. So for instance, like, there was a lot of really weird stuff we did. There are a couple things that immediately come to mind. There was one time where we had to eat baby food out of diapers and guess the flavor. We did Bean Boozled once or twice, and I actually liked the grass one, so I could asked if I could take the grass ones. Like, yeah, sure, whatever, because I was the weird kid, because of course I was. And there was one time where we were learning about the kids in Africa, presumably to get us to go do mission trips, which are really bad. That's a whole thing for another video. There would be kids in Africa, or I mean people in Africa, it's not kids, who would have like these worms burrow into their feet, and because they don't have shoes, right? So they want us to donate to give them shoes, which I mean is only a temporary solution. So like, why not? Anyway, that's beside the point. So we had these, like, it was an apple pie topped with like sardine paste or something, with yellow mustard on top of it. I think it was actually spicy mustard, I don't remember. And then there were like sour candies in it, and it was supposed to be like a really gross thing. And you had to eat as much of it as you could, and whoever ate the most, got won, I guess. I don't remember there being a prize. There were also like stupid things like dance competitions where everyone would go up on stage and just kind of like bob around. Some people were decent at dancing. I was awful, but I was really outgoing at the time. Very much so. Not now. Anyway, so there would be stuff like that. It was fun, but it was also, not biblical. From what I know, a bunch of different youth groups are like that. There were some that were less extreme, of course. And then it would go into worship, I think, after the games, which I loved. And this was my thing. I loved singing. And I came up to the youth pastor, and I'm like, hey, so I think God's calling me to be on the worship team, even though I just wanted to sing up on stage. It was because I wanted to worship. I enjoyed worshiping at the time, right? And I enjoyed singing, so I'm like, hey, and I got up there. And I was really excited about that for a while. And then eventually, they just took all that down. But it crumbled over a very long amount of time. And I mean, it wasn't anything special. I just went up on stage and sang for a few weeks. And given how little this happened, again, it was only once a week, right? The changes felt like they were over a very long period of time. But if it was day after day after day, it would be just like that, right? I would imagine it only took a couple of months for maybe 7 or 8 weeks for me to be off of that, but it felt like I did it so much, right? Just because of how spread out it was. And then of course, they would do a message, and it was always boring church stuff, but I would be super invested. Like the only thing I remember learning from any youth group thing, and I'm sure a lot of my just reading the Bible came from doing that sort of thing, but the only thing that I remember specifically learning from the youth pastor during one of those was that pray, as in P-R-A-Y, and P-R-E-Y, both have the same root. So that's cool, I guess. I don't remember what that was used to convey, and I only remember that because I had a note of it on a Google document because I didn't want to open my notes app, and I already had Google Docs open. Anyway. Actually, wait, no. I might have wrote it in a notebook, and I was going through my stuff. Anyway, point is, I had a note of it somewhere, and I saw it recently. And then I just never got rid of it because there was other stuff in that notebook, and I was still crushing at the time, so I kept the notes, right? And I would look back on it again like, oh yeah, that was a thing. Though I haven't seen that specific note for like a year now. I think it was in a notebook. Anyway, that's... another thing that I really explicitly remember, we had a bus. Like, we had a school bus, but the school bus part was painted over, so it didn't actually say school bus. I think they were going to paint like amped bus on it or something, I don't remember. But there was a bus because there were kids, and we would go on field trips. People would get given rides home. Like there were enough people to do that sort of thing consistently, and there were a couple things that I specifically remember. One was on the way home from a big like camp thing, which I'll get to the camps. The camps were big, I guess. But there was also the thing that happened on the way from home from the camp. I want to talk about this now so it doesn't encroach on the camp story. Everyone was dancing around. One specific guy was twerking, and he was a big guy. So, like, everyone knew. And the youth pastors didn't say anything. I'm like, you should probably not do that. That's, like, not a Christian. That's not a good Christian thing to do. And no one was paying attention because everyone was dancing and whatever. And no one said anything about it. We got home, and I think it was actually the next day because it was a Friday, and we came home on a Saturday or something. I don't remember. No, we came home on a Saturday, and we went to church the next day. And the youth pastor, like the actual youth pastor, was like, we saw some inappropriate behavior on the bus, and I don't remember. It was dumb because they could have just like said something right there, and that would have mitigated everything. And I was specifically staying out of it. I remember sitting there at the back of the bus, just sitting there with my head down, my eyes closed, just wanting to get home because I'd been at the camp for the past couple days. I was feeling homesick, but also I wanted to tell people about these things that I really enjoyed at the camp. Meanwhile, there's a guy twerking right in front of my face because I was sitting in one of those sideways facing seats at the back of the bus. Anyway, weird times, good times, but weird times. And oh yeah, there was another time on the bus. I don't know why I remember this so specifically because I can't imagine it was the weirdest thing that happened. But someone was chewing a wad of gum, and they were like, hey, they asked the driver, who was also the youth pastor, because he had an actual license, I guess. I don't know why. I think he was actually a school bus driver for a while. Anyway, he's like, hey, can I open this window to spit my gum out? Because whatever. And the guy, the driver, he's like, I don't remember what led up to this. I do not remember how this happened. I don't know who came up with the idea, but he's like, you know what, we'll stop at Burger King and I'll get you guys something if y'all chew on the gum. It was so gross. This is so inappropriate. I cannot believe that we actually went through with this. The guy who had the gum was like, all right, and he gave it to someone else, and they chewed on it and put it to the next person. And the guy before me, it was so gross. He like intentionally just covered it in saliva. Ugh. It makes me nauseous thinking about it now. But I was okay with it. I was like, whatever, I'll get Burger King out of this. I got a Whopper, and that was when I learned that I didn't like Burger King all too much. That was awful. And we'd always have music blaring on the bus because it was fun and youth group something. Now, all of this, why am I saying all this, right? Because, of course, it's an interesting story. It's a fun story. But also, there's a sinister side to this, if you think about it. It's borderline indoctrination. There's all this fun, over-the-top stuff, free food, games, and loud music and all this to lure in the youth. And I'm not saying this as I don't think that, people do this intentionally as like a trap, right? Because they do genuinely believe this stuff. But also, I don't think that it's okay just because the intention isn't negative. So that's why I'm bringing this up, right? So it's essentially a lure for the youth, and they get in, and with they're lured in with all the cool fun stuff, and then it's like, you're gonna go to hell if you don't follow us, whatever. It's very cultish. It is very cultish. I don't think it technically qualifies as a cult because there was borderline behavior control, but it wasn't like you couldn't leave at any time. So we had, for instance, at one point we had an app on our phone that would track if whatever we saw, or if we were looking up porn or whatever. It was an accountability app, and like it was a horrible accountability app, but that's as far as it went for behavior control. I remember I was reading, I don't remember what the webtoon was called, but I was reading a webtoon, and it was like this stupid comedy one. It got really bad later because they went episodic instead of comedy. Anyway, or they went like a overarching plot. It doesn't matter. It's for a different time. It was like there was like this really big-headed guy, and it was like the weirdo class, right? And they'd all have weird abnormalities. One guy had really long arms. One girl was only in there because she had a tail, and she was like the cute one, I guess. I don't know, the love interest. One guy had a big head. One guy, I don't even remember. It's been so long. Anyway, one character was just a really small girl, and like really small. That was her entire character. That was the funny. And one of the titles was Small Girl, and it flagged that. But also, one time I was looking through fan art of like Zelda stuff, really tame actually, and because internet, one of Minda came up, and it was like, of course on porn sites you get weird, stupid titles like giant boobs, all this. I'm like, whoa, and it sent an email to my youth pastor, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna die. So I sent an email to him. I'm like, dude, I was just looking at fan art. I don't know what happened. So that was fun. Anyway, you could totally get around it, by the way. It was a bad accountability app. I just remember that because, that's as far as it went with behavior control. As for things like thought control, of course, they would bring in, you're gonna go to hell if you don't listen, and God's always watching and all that, but that's, for the whole thing. That's not exclusive to youth groups, but I feel like they put on a lot of pressure, maybe not intentionally, to stay. Some of the youth do. I remember I very specifically did. I'm like, oh, dude, it's God, and I would be very adamant to the people that I invited that, like, hey, yo, God's real. He loves you, dude. And all this, which, like, I did genuinely believe it. And now looking back on it, it's so obvious that it's not right. But getting them while they're young is definitely, a goal of theirs because it's easier. And again, not necessarily intentionally or out of malice or whatever, but I mean, it just happens, right? When you have an ideology that you want people to follow, it falls into that sort of thing. Now, I don't think youth groups are inherently bad, necessarily, because if you believe something, yeah, you should go for everyone regardless. But it's the tactics they use that I think are dangerous. Also, like an adult or two with a huge group of children, specifically in order to make them believe something. Yeah, especially with the sort of things we did, like the stupid games and the wad of gum. Like, how that wouldn't happen in any other setting other than like a group of friends. But like, when you're treating it as a group of friends and you have this adult along with these, teenagers, usually around, 14, 15 years old, that can get dicey, especially when the youth pastor's trying to act cool and all that, right? Yeah, he was one of, and like, don't get me wrong, I loved the youth pastors. They were really cool people. Every single one. I loved all of them. I don't really talk to them much anymore because, I'm not Christian. And I don't think I've talked to the one that was the bus driver for 2 or 3 years. But like, it's just, it's not predatory. I don't want to say it's predatory because I genuinely believe a lot of them have the best intention, but it's so dangerous, right? And I think it needs to be fought against. I think this shouldn't happen. Not necessarily teaching kids, but not as a separate group. Kids in this context should not be taught separately just because it invites danger into it inherently, right? And there aren't as many precautions and as many, safeguards and whatnot as there would be in, say, a school, right? Because in schools you have full organizations, you have government, you have like security cameras, and you have all of these safety lines that you just don't have with the church. And like, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. That's my point here. But back to the fun stuff real quick. I guess maybe not fun stuff. Well, we'll see. To lighten the mood a bit before, so you're not thinking about child predation in church for who knows how long. There were these camps that we'd go to, right? There were 3 specifically that I remember. There was one called Camp Tadmor, which I went to when I was 7 or 9. I think I was 9. I was 9 years old. That's right. And all I remember about that is the theme that year was Bigfoot. And we ran around chasing Bigfoot during one of the times. Or, like, we had pre-allotted, like, activity times. And then we had, like, like 4 hours of free time throughout the day. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it because I had so many activities that you could do. But also allowing children free reign over this campground, essentially, with just teenagers as counselors. So again, dangerous. Like, really dangerous. Shouldn't have done it. But, like, is outdoor school all that different? Of course, again, with the school, you have a lot more precautions. You have a lot more people. There wasn't free time at outdoor school. So I guess the argument doesn't really work. Or at least for my outdoor school. So I guess it really depends on the context. But in this context, it was really dangerous for the kids to just be given complete free reign with essentially what amounts to teenagers watching over them, and that's it. Though, of course, there were older people. They had security and all that. But that was the year. I remember I was sitting in the camp tent with my counselor on like the third or fourth day, and I was like, "Hey, I think I'm ready to give my life to Jesus." And he's like, "All right, I will bow our heads and we'll pray and repeat after me." And he's like, I was like, "I," and he's like, "Give my life to Jesus." We did the whole thing, the whole shebang. It was essentially a ritual. And that's pretty much all I remember of Camp Tadmor. It was a good time. There was a kissing booth, and I went up to it. I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to get a kiss." And they gave me a Hershey's. I was like, hell yeah, this is exactly what I wanted. Good times. Another camp that I remember was called, I don't think there was a name for it. It was just like a summer camp. It was in Eastern Oregon. So it was like, there was one day that it was perfectly clear, sunny, fine, warm, really warm. It was nice. We had like a big slip and slide, and by big slip and slide, I mean a giant tarp on the ground that had soapy water on it. And we slid around that. One kid actually ripped his shorts on that. That was really funny. One kid like intentionally tore his shirt off. Good times. Multiple people destroyed their knees on rocks under the tarp because of course that's gonna happen. That's the fun part of it though, right? And it was soapy water, so it's not like it was unclean. Yeah, it was fun. Like, again, all of this was really fun, but that's kind of part of the problem, right? And we had like this giant foosball table, but it wasn't a table. It was like this. It was basically a wooden frame with two holes on the end for quote unquote goals. There were bars with like a PVC outer ring that you could slide along it. So you'd hold on to the PVC, sliding along these poles, kicking the ball. So you'd have three people on each side who would just like try to kick the ball into the other person's goal while holding onto that PVC as like a limitation. So it was basically big foosball, as I called it. It was they had a bunch of activities like that. But the one thing I do not remember at all what they taught during that. I do not remember what they talked about during that entire experience. The only thing that I specifically remember that was a big thing, I was my youth pastor, set up trail cams because they're for whatever reason, right? And one day he's like sitting over at his laptop. He's like, "What the heck?" Like he had that expression on his face, and one of the youth. From my youth group came up to him because there were a bunch of youth groups here and that applied to all of the camps, right? So he walked over to him and he was like, "Hey, what's going on? What's at that face?" I don't remember the exact dialogue. This is all very paraphrased. And I didn't get to see. He was very much like not letting me see intentionally. And then eventually I did see it, and it was, I swear to God, I, at the time, thought it was completely real. There was a Sasquatch, essentially. It was a white, like, it wasn't a ghillie suit, but it was a very Sasquatch suit. And he had a person draped over his shoulder in one of the pictures. We were like, "Oh my God, what the heck? That's a Sasquatch right there." So that night, we went outside, a bunch of us from the youth group, and we went to like set up the trail cams at night because that's smart. And on our way back, and everyone's like, oh man, there's a Sasquatch out here. Keep your lights off and be quiet and all that. We hear a branch, like a big branch, just and we freak out, just like full on sprinting back to the cabin. It was terrifying. That's all I have to say about that. Good times, which is the problem. The last one is called Catalyst Winter Camp. It was at a ranch I guess in Eastern Oregon, it was in the middle of winter. I think it was January actually. Um, Horrible time to have a camp because it's cold. But whatever. So we go out there, and I went to this one 2 or 3 years. All of these camps were stupid expensive, except for the last one that I was talking about. The Camp Tadmor was like $200 or $300. Catalyst was like $150. And of course, that goes towards food and lodging and electricity. But it was like really expensive. It was fun, but it was really expensive. So we had fundraising for it and all that. And we got there. There was for free time. There was free time, and we could do a bunch of different stuff. They had frisbee golf. They had ropes that we couldn't go on because it was the winter, like a ropes course, a sky ropes course. There was a pool that we couldn't use because it was winter. They had a whole skate park, like an indoor skate park. They had like courts, like basketball courts. I think they had 4 or 5 basketball courts, but a couple of them were volleyball, or they had a volleyball net up. There was a gym there. They had a bunch of different stuff, and the food they had. I remember the food being really good. They had really, really good food, and we had cabins and whatever. And there was like one big chapel area where we would go to be taught. And these camps. This was the camp that it was probably the biggest one that had an impact on my faith. I always came back from these camps like, I'm going to be such a good Christian. Because the way and this extends towards basically all pastors, right? They would present these messages, despite them being from, the Bible. They would present them as very, emotional and important. They would have music playing in the background. They would talk in, this very grandiose tone of voice. While pretending to be humble. I remember this one guy. I think his name was Tom. I do not remember his last name. His name was Tom. Tom Bachman. He's a very public figure. He spoke at this, and he's like, while this soft, sentimental music is playing in the background, he's like, "Wow, that guy's such a better speaker than me. I mean, at this point, I feel booger up my nose. I'm probably gonna turn around and pick that in a moment." He's projecting this humility and this very down to earthness, while also giving this grandiose, this message is important thing, which is extremely manipulative. And a lot of things do this. It's not just religion that does this, but religion is one of the biggest, what's the word I'm looking for? They do it the most. Religion is one of the biggest proponents. That's not the word. Anyway, they do it. Religion does it a lot, and that's what I'm focusing on here, so I'm bringing it up. And they would, and it would be like this for everything, not even just this camp, but they did it in such a way that was so grandiose. You had all these different youth groups, and I specifically remember one time they're like, your Christian friends, they're not really your friend, or you're not Christian friends, they're not really your friends. They might claim to be your friends, but that's a worldly relationship, and you need to not be in that. And of course, I was like, all right, I'm going to go to school tomorrow, in whatever, how many days it was, and I'm going to be like, hey guys, I can't be your friends because I need to follow God. But I never did, of course, because it was just, it was worthless. It was damaging to relationships. It was manipulative, all this stuff. I loved it at the time. Which is a problem. It was a huge problem, and it has left a huge impact on me. Even now, I'm remembering all this because it was so impactful. And it's dangerous, right? Every youth group thing here, all of this, it ties into being dangerous, being manipulative, being, just bad in general. Not inherently, but because of circumstances, it is bad, it is negative, and we need to do something about it. Probably. I don't know. Oh yeah, at the Catalyst camp they had Octoball, and I had no idea what that was up there at the time. And it was just these big octagonal wooden frames that you would stand in. You would jump in there, and they had the balls that go doink when they hit you in the face. They had one of those, and you would slap it around. You couldn't specifically get the ball off the ground, and if the ball hit you in your shins, or below the knee, you would be out. Anyway, that's all for this one. I hope you enjoyed. I don't know how many more my experience with Christianity videos are going to be, because I'm kind of running out of topics to talk about. Not necessarily because there's not more to talk about, but because I've already gotten all the like lessons and like all the reasons, right? I can't really qualify a video about, like this one time when I went to church and I met this one guy and then we did parkour. Like, I can't turn that into a video, right? Because there's no message behind it. There's no reason to make it other than, entertainment value. But I don't know. That's not the kind of video I would want to watch. I don't want to watch someone mindlessly talking about this guy he did parkour with after church for a year. Like, that's just not interesting to me. So I probably won't be making that sort of video. That guy was Rhett, actually. He was in a video. If you go back in my channel, a long time, is the PB&J Dreams. I'll link it in the card or whatever. Anyway, that's beside the point. So there will be at least a couple more, so don't worry about that. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. I love you all, and I don't know how to end this.